would like to recall Jonathan Flack as a witness.
Mr. Flack, I'll remind you, you're still under oath, sir.
Yes, sir.
And Your Honor, I request permission to treat this witness as a hostile witness.
Well, as a party, so
Yeah.
opposing party, you may use leading questions.
Okay. Since you're up here, sir, I've already given opposing counsel this as the websites that Mr. Flack testified to yesterday.
Your Honor, once again, I object on the grounds that there is no exhibit list filed.
Your Honor, their witness brought up the website, and so it's only fair that we will be able to talk about the website that they brought up.
I'll overrule the objection. I'm not accepting this as, at this point, as being the actual website that might have been viewed, but he can use this document to ask questions about the witness's prior testimony. So why don't you show it to him and ask him questions. I'm not receiving it as an exhibit right now, but if you want to ask the witness questions about it, you can. Then if you want to offer it as an exhibit, I'll consider any objections at that point.
And just to add, Your Honor, I did send Mr. Flack a link to the actual websites on the web archive. There is an internet website. Mr. Brewster's probably familiar with it since he knows a lot about computers, that you can put in a URL and it brings back the snapshots. It's an independent website that keeps all the snapshots from the going all the way back 20, 30 years on any website.
Well, why don't you ask him questions about whatever it is you just handed him and see what he says, and I'll see if there's any relevance to that to come in as an exhibit.
All right. Okay. So, Mr. Flack, you testified yesterday that you were looking up information on Mr. Adams' website?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you said that the website had information about, like, the history, the music that he did, and so forth. Information about his company and himself, having been in the music business.
Yes, sir.
Okay. If you look on the exhibit that was just handed to you, on the next to the last page is a picture. I'm sorry, the third to the last page is a picture of Mr. Adams. Okay. And this says, John Adams, CEO, empowered with the knowledge of sales, marketing, and advertising, and has many years of experience in the music, film, television, real estate, and building industry, has announced that Wholesale Home Services will launch a major televised home service network unlike any online service at the worldwide real estate network, and begin airing on in 2011. So it talks a little about his music history. This look at all familiar to what you were saying when you were looking at it? I know it's some years ago.
No, sir. So when you brought that up, the snapshot, I went on. It's public. It's free. They do it. You can bring up the calendar of when the snapshots of the websites is done.
Mm-hmm.
It shows for a month. You know, a snapshot was done on this date, or you could choose when those snapshots were done. So 2016, one website said there was only 14 or 15 snapshots. I was trying to scroll through and see what I seen. The website was extremely basic. Now, I don't know where it was the device I was using. I know back then I didn't have the greatest, devices. I didn't even have a tablet. I had a very simple phone. I'd gotten to a point that the only thing I was researching is this man real?
Okay.
I had only gone on faith through what I was told through my sister-in-law of him being because we agreed upon for hiring a licensed contractor to do all the work and then the agreements and whatnot, and throughout the project I was kind of questioning, is this man real? Does he have a business? Does he have a contractor's license? And I just happened to remember a receipt laying there with a logo on it, and so I went and searched John Adams, and I happened to see that logo. When I clicked on it, it took me to a website that was just one simple page. It didn't go into anything else, and you just scroll down through there, and the logo looked the same. It just listed John Adams, a little bit of his history. I mentioned something about music, and I was like, okay, he's real. So I didn't investigate into anything else. It was just my peace of mind.
So you
Because
saw,
I really
you saw,
did not know the man at the time, but it was just listed simple, like different things. Music, like a simple line, licensed contractor, and different lines. I just remember seeing the things I was worried about.
okay.
And I just exited out of it.
So it was a pretty basic website, and it had the logo on it. Could this be what you saw?
It was that buy wholesale big logo was at the top of it, and all it gave you the option to do was to scroll straight down.
Okay.
That's all I could do on it. It didn't have. I didn't find an option to like menus or anything like that. It's just like a cover page. that
Okay,
you just scroll
It
down.
was just a cover page.
It did give his business address on it.
Okay, when you're looking at
And
this,
a couple phone numbers, and that's it.
okay, so looking at this exhibit here, you see the 25 Lincoln Street, Nashville, Tennessee 37210. That's that's the address you saw.
I remember.
Maybe.
I remember it was a Nashville.
Nashville.
address.
Okay, and there's the phone number on here. Okay.
Because she had told me he has a business in Nashville that he sells to contractors, and we're able to get this done so cheaply because he sells products, so there's not as much markup to make, so I could believe how he's able to do cheaper than other estimates we've done. It's making sense.
Okay.
But so when she told me there's an actual building he has, it's somewhere in Nashville, and I see, okay, there's a Nashville address. I don't know the exact address, but those were the key things that when I Google searched, that put my mind at ease. Is this man real?
Okay. And it's your testimony that you went and you looked last night, and you brought up off of the archive machine, and you found the same website.
I did not find what I seen.
Okay, you did not.
I
find what you said.
did notice, like later on, whenever I tried to search the same thing, it come up no longer. After I'd seen it before, because I was going to try and show somebody else the same thing that I'd seen. I couldn't available at the time, but I didn't know about archiving. But
Okay.
I looked up what the archiving is, and then I'm like, well, this is probably why, because people, change or add something, it may not have caught the snapshot at the time, because there's long durations
Yes. Okay.
between those snapshots that you're available to see.
Okay. So your testimony is last night when you tried to look through the web archive, you did not find a web archive that said Buy Wholesale Inc. licensed contractor.
That showed exactly what I remember seeing.
Okay.
The formats are different.
Okay.
Of what the snapshots were showing.
Okay. Okay. No further questions. You may.
Cross-examination?
No questions, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flack. You can step down. Next witness.
Okay, I'll go ahead and call Mr. Adams as a witness.
Please stand on this first step and face me. Please raise your right hand and place your left hand on the Bible. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in the cause pending will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please take a seat.
Mr. Adams, Vicki Brewster has testified today, and through,
Why don't you have him introduce himself
I'm
for
sorry,
the record?
introduce yourself for the court.
John Kimball Adams.
Okay. And how did you first get to know the plaintiffs?
In sometime around the first or the second month of 2016, I placed an ad. I was looking for a bookkeeper, and Vicki responded to it. We had several conversations. She came and met with me. She gave me a long history of her experience as a bookkeeper. I told her exactly what we needed to have done. We were behind on some of the books, and we had several companies that we were gonna need her help with, and we agreed on a price that we would pay her. She asked if she could do the work at home. I said, fine, we can email it to you, come by, pick up the receipts on a monthly basis. We just have a lot of work we need to get caught up on.
Okay, okay. And Ms. Brewster testified today that you email her periodically about work on the books,
Exactly.
right? And that work was for what companies?
Well, we had at that time 2 companies. My father, Marion H. Adams, he and I had built homes for years and commercial buildings in Atlanta. He was getting older, but when we moved here in 2000, well, my wife moved up in 2008. I actually had to finish up some projects in Atlanta, so we kept her home there, and I moved up here in 2010. Give you a little bit of history about contracting. Back before 2010 in Georgia, the state of Georgia didn't require contractors to have state issue license. All that changed in about 2000, after the recession, of the Great Recession of 2008. So when we came to Tennessee, we had about 25 houses on the ground in Georgia at the time. My father had gone to Texas. It was my job to liquidate those homes and finish up. So when we moved up here to Tennessee, my wife had already been here for a year and a half. She had started her real estate company, because we've both been licensed real estate agents and brokers in Georgia for 30 years. I started my license in 1983. So I have a vast background in real estate sales. I have a vast background in construction. I have a vast background in marketing, TV production, music production, so on and so forth. So when we got to Tennessee, or I got up here to Tennessee after we liquidated all the properties in Georgia, I had decided that what I really wanted to do was go into the building material business, because I had a friend that had been pretty successful with it. But at the same time, we realized at that time that we would still need to offer contracting services. So my father and I applied with the state of Tennessee, and we decided that we would get what they call a remodeler's license. It gives you a ceiling of $25,000. That license was obtained under a company my father owned called Wholesale Home Services. I was also listed as the manager on that, which gave me the ability to review contracts, to enter into contracts, to do everything that the principal contractor could do. In other words, my father was technically the licensee on the license for Wholesale Home Services, and I was listed as the manager to do and function just like he did, sign contracts, capacity, so on and so forth. So the issues that have been raised about were we licensed or unlicensed, we were licensed. And we were licensed by the state of Tennessee.
Okay.
So that issue should come to be rested, because
Okay.
we were properly licensed.
I have an exhibit that I've already given to plaintiff's counsel. I would like this to be entered as a numbered exhibit. This is an email between Mr. Adams and Ms. Brewster regarding one of the companies and the bookkeeping work that she's already
Or have the
testified
witness
that she did.
identified?
Yes, that is the document.
Any objection?
Your Honor, I'm going to raise the same objection. There's no exhibit list filed with the court.
Your Honor, if I may.
No. this supposed to purport to be, Mr. Drake?
So this is, when Ms. Brewster was testifying earlier, she talked repeatedly about work that she did, and her counsel brought forth all sorts of emails. He didn't actually bring forth any exhibits of the work, but this is an exhibit of some of the work that Ms. Brewster did. This gets to the heart of the Consumer Protection Act, Your Honor, because for them to make the claim, they have to actually show that they were actually deceived. And she was actually very familiar with this company that was owned by Marion Adams, and she has already testified to that fact. This is
And
just
who's Marianne Adams?
That's Mr. Adams' father, who's now deceased, but was alive back in 2015.
And you wanted to offer this to show some sort of knowledge on the part of Ms. Brewster?
Knowledge on the part of Ms. Brewster is also structure of the company and the business.
Sustain the objection. You may mark it for identification purposes.
Okay.
I'll be glad to do that. Respectfully, and I recognize Mr. Adams was representing himself back in January of 2021 when the witness exhibit list was given. Nonetheless, I'm giving you some latitude on this, and particularly with matters in which the plaintiffs were aware, emails between themselves and whatnot, and Mr. Adams, anything like this goes beyond that scope, and I think that should have been disclosed if that was something we were going to be relying upon. But I will mark it for identification purposes only as exhibit number 13.
Okay. Okay, so explain the difference between Buy Wholesale Inc. and Wholesale Home Services, as far as the type of business that they were doing.
My father was getting older, so my CPA had advised me that at some point he would probably not be involved in the businesses, and he had advised me to set up another entity. And so we were phasing out Wholesale Home Services because Wholesale Services did a lot of the same things that eventually Buy Wholesale would do, except Buy Wholesale wouldn't participate in construction matters. Only the licensed company would do that. So, and in fact, Vicki Brewster knew this quite well because I had numerous conversations with her about it. She even asked me one day, "What's this $100 for?" And I said, "Well, that's a fee that we have to pay the state every year to renew the license." So she was quite aware of how Buy Wholesale Incorporated, which I was the CEO, was formed, and how Wholesale Home Service was operated and owned by my father, and I managed it. So that was just that. I mean, it was just a fact.
Okay. Now,
And she worked on both books.
right. So when we got into the actual business dealing that brought us here today, who approached you about this?
Vicki, while she was doing books for us, called me one day and said, I think it was her father-in-law had passed away, and that she was going to have, she knew I was in real estate, my wife was in real estate, and she wanted some advice. And I said, well, if it were me, I said, I'd hire my wife and let her sell the property for me. So Vicki did hire Barbara, and she did sell the property for her. She also mentioned to Barbara that she was going to give her an opportunity to maybe sell some other real estate. After that, Vicki told me that she was planning on buying some other property, and I said, well, we can help you with that as well. But she said, we want to do a pole barn in the back of this property that we're considering purchasing. And I said, okay, well, what is it? She says, well, I want to send over some information, and I want you to give me an estimate. So this is in March, so I got an email from her, and she had a survey, or she had some information about the property and how she wanted it placed and all. So I called her, I think I emailed her back and said, well, if you want to save money, build it this way, so, because this is the standard sizes, 12s, 14, 16 size of the trusses and so forth. So she asked me to give her an estimate of what she thought material cost would be on that project. So that document that was shown to the court earlier was basically a document that showed, I drew it out. I could actually pull it off a website, that particular layout. And I gave her an estimate of what I thought it would take to construct just the shell, not the entire building, just the shell. In fact, I even made notes. It doesn't include this, it doesn't include this, it doesn't include this, it doesn't include this. Plus, hadn't even seen the property. So all I did was just give her an estimate of what I thought that building might, from a material standpoint and basically standing it up, would cost.
Okay, and that initial estimate was how much?
About $33,000.
Okay, and that's without looking at the property or going out there?
I never saw the property.
Never saw the property, okay. She sent you a drawing, right, of the property layout?
Yeah, she sent me a snapshot of, I think what she got from the realtor, of the plat with a building placed on the backside of the property. And that's kind of said, okay, well, that's where you want it. You know, that's not material right now. Let's just talk about what it's gonna cost to possibly
So
get.
at all that point, all you'd seen was a drawing?
Yeah, that's all I'd say.
Okay. And so, how did you get to the other estimate, the $60,000?
Well, I think as time went on, she called me several times, we were getting closer to buying, but we really wanna get this deal done. And so I said, well, then let me dig into it more and come up with some kind of quote. I said, it's not gonna be inked, but I'll come up with a quote for you of what I think would be involved. And let me tell you something about this whole relationship. I told her from the very beginning, I don't wanna do this, Vicki. I quit building houses and buildings. I said, I don't wanna do this contracting anymore. It's a pain in the rear end, I don't wanna do it. Oh, please do it for me, please do it for me. I need the best deal I can get. And I said, Vicki, I'm gonna tell you one thing before we ever get started. There is no way I'm gonna permit this job. I said, I will act as a supervisor for you. I will help you find people, but I'm not getting involved in going down and getting permits. I said, I'll go down, in fact, even in one of my emails, I'll go down with you and help you get the permit, because I'm familiar with the process. But I'm not going on the permit. You're gonna act as your own contractor. I'm there to supervise and help you get, and buy wholesale will sell you the materials.
Okay.
In fact, when it comes to the licensing part of this, I also said, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So that part, we got started on. We gave her the estimate, said, well, I'm ready to go forward. But, I got another situation. I need to have a few things done on the inside of this house. I said, well, what do you need done? Well, I gotta move this wall, and I gotta cut this countertop so we can put some appliances in. I said, wow, Vicki, now you're giving me more stuff to do. I said, let me go look at it. So I went and looked at it. At that time, it was just a wall, putting up a fan and a light switch and cutting a counter to put in her appliances. So I said, well, look, if we're gonna do this other deal, you're gonna give me, 10, 12,000, whatever it is, 20% of whatever the thing comes out to be, I'll just help you out with this. But I said, I don't really think you have to get a permit on this, but I'm not permitting it. All I'm gonna do is help you find the people to do this job, and I'll help supervise it, and that's it. Oh yeah, okay. Then the next thing, I get another call back, after she gave me some money to get some wood to start the inside. Oh, well, we wanna do this bathroom. And oh, by the way, I want you to put some hardwood floors in the living room. And so, Vicky, the problem with your hardwood floors is it's concrete. I said, you're gonna have to put a subfloor. Oh, that's okay. What's that gonna cost? I said, well, maybe $5,000 or $6,000. I said, we'll have to get the materials and check it. Oh yeah, we want you to do that. So, in your opinion, what do you think this is all gonna cost? I said, Vicky, I have no way of really knowing for sure, but you know, $15,000, $16,000. It could go higher. Oh yeah, let's just get it done. Let's just get it done. I said, well, I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. We got this quote that I've given you on the building. If you're gonna move forward buying materials and doing that, and you're gonna pay me to supervise it, that's fine. I won't even charge you a dime. I'll just help you out. I'm not gonna charge you anything. She didn't pay me a dime on that work, other than I gave her the receipts of where I spent the money, so on and so forth. So that's how that all came about.
Okay, so you're saying on the floor, it was actual hardwood floor, not laminate?
If I remember, we helped her pick it out. It could have been hardwood, it could have been laminate. The point
Could've been
was
anything,
that it
okay.
was on concrete, and when you do concrete, you can't apply very effectively because it'll pop on you. You have to put up what we call a floating floor, a subfloor. So you hilty down plywood, 3/4 inch plywood, and then you nail your hardwood flooring or your laminate flooring, whatever it is, to that subfloor.
Okay, so the subfloor is plywood that has to be anchored down, and then the laminate or the hardwood, whichever it was, went on top of that.
Yeah, that ate up about $5,000 or $6,000 that I remember.
Okay, okay. And so meanwhile, the things going on there are. Tell me about the because there was mention before about the grading. What was the issue with the grading?
Before she ever started this project, I warned her. I said, Vicki, I'm telling you right now, before you get started, you need to have a survey, topo, you need to go through the process that any contractor goes through to do this. Well, I only got a certain amount of money. I said, well then, at least, I said, who'd you buy the house from? She told me. I said, well, was there a survey? She said, yeah, I think so. I said, well then go back to that surveyor and get him to provide a survey, and most importantly, you get him to stake out, because when I went out there to look at the property, we went down this long slope. She said, this is where we want the building. I said, Vicki, this is not the best place to put this building. You're over 100 yards from your house. It's a steep slope. I said, why can't we just move the building up and it'll cut your cost? Oh, no, it's gotta be down here. I said, well, Vicki, here's the bottom line. You call that surveyor, you get him out here, and you stake this house or this barn exactly where you want it. I'll put it where you mark it, and your surveyor mark it, because I've been down that road before. I'm not coming out here and staking out something, and you go, oh, well, that's not where I wanted it. And so it's very clear in the testimony, some of the previous dealings in the court, that surveyor provided the survey, and he staked that property out. He staked where that building, I wasn't even out there. He staked where that building was to be placed, per her instructions.
Now, you said the word topo. I don't know it's construction jargon. What is topo?
Topo gives you the elevation, so that when you start to look at grading and cost and so on and so forth, you can make determinations of how far the property is dropping.
So topo is a topographical map.
Yes.
And was that ever provided?
No. That's why I had to eyeball it. So when I went out there and she said, this is where I want the building, I went, ooh. And I said, okay, we'll see what we can do. So when the building was constructed, it absolutely was on a slope. And as I looked at it and started seeing how it was built, or how we had placed it in the ground, the only way we could place it in the ground, I said, wow, this is going to have to be raised. This slab is going to have to be raised. And I had one of my concrete guys come out there and said, John, this is such a steep slope. What are you going to do? I said, we're going to have to backfill it. There's no other way to do it. The slope on the driveway will be so steep they won't even be able to get up it. And, you know, in the winter I was referring to. I mean, in dry season you could do what you need to do. So all these things were discussed with her. She was warned ever before we started this project, the process as her being the contractor, what she needed to do.
Okay.
Now, yes, it was my job to make sure that these things were executed along with her, but
Okay. There was some testimony, Mr. Brewster, about why wasn't the grading done before the building to avoid the backfill or something like that. Can you explain that?
if the property, you know, the sad part about this whole thing is that most of the people in this room, with all due respect, know nothing about construction. I do. And I can tell you right now, when you put up a pole barn, one of the ways you save money is that you don't go into extensive grading. There was no need to do extensive grading. It would have been simpler to move the building up and then do the grading to cut out than to fill. You can always cut out cheaper than you can fill. So, but for whatever reason, these 3 people here, or 4 people, it's got to be down at the bottom of the hill. Okay, that's where you want it. That's where you're going to stake it. That's where we'll put it up.
Okay, so your testimony is if they wanted to do cheaper, it could have been done cheaper at a different location on the property.
Absolutely.
But doing grading at that location would not have saved the money over back.
There was no need to grade, because if you graded at that point, you would have dug the building even deeper. That means as the slope comes down, you would have had even more water problems. The idea was to lift the building up so you didn't have water problems. That's why it had to be backfilled.
Okay. Now, on to some things on the inside of the building. And Your Honor, I apologize for some technical difficulties. My computer is a bank computer and I can't take a thumb drive. If it's okay with counsel, we'll describe, because we did watch the video off of his Macintosh last night, but the Macintosh doesn't have an HDMI port.
Okay.
Okay. So we watched a video last night where it showed the measuring the level of the thermostat. What was wrong with that measurement?
If you look at that video real carefully, you'll see that the level is on top of a concurve thermostat. He's got the thermostat, he's got the level laying too far to the right. And if you look at it carefully, you'll see a small gap on one side and you'll see a larger gap on the other side. Well, that means that in order to check the level of that thermostat, because it has that concave top, you would need to take that level and set it at the center point, with the level being at the center point, and hold it tight, and then see if it was level. And it clearly shows on the video that the level is slightly to the right, and it's slanted like this, and you can see a bigger gap on this side than you see on this. But let me say something about that as well. Thermostat.
Mr. Adams, why don't you listen to the questions asked
Okay.
by the lawyer and just respond to the questions
Okay.
asked, all right?
All right.
I'm sorry, that's kind of the way we need to work
Okay,
here.
no problem.
And they had an expert here yesterday, but they didn't ask him about that. Would he have been able to understand the issue about the level?
You want my
I'll
honest
object.
opinion?
That calls for
Okay,
speculation.
withdrawn, question withdrawn. Okay, on the HVAC unit, and we were seeing the video where there was, I guess, a 2x4 kind of on a jack on one side of it.
A leg.
A leg, right, and they were talking about, if that was moved, the whole thing would fall, right? On the other side, where this was standing, was there a 2x4 going from the ground, top to the ground there?
No.
So it was held up in the air, not by that 2x4, but by the fact it was anchored to the wall.
If you look carefully at the video, you'll see where he grabs the 2x4 and so, it's loose. But if you look at the support 2x4, it's nailed to the wall on one side, it's nailed on the other side, and has a 3/4 inch OSB top where the air handler sits. That's standard procedure. I've built hundreds of houses. You frame them out, you make a little box, you put the air handler on it. What probably happened when they changed the door, whatever reason, somebody cut a jack. And it was probably going to be used when they installed the new door. It had nothing to do with the stability or the structure of that air handler sitting on its platform. The platform was secure. It had a stud across the back, had a stud across the front, had a stud on this side. Where was it going to go?
Okay. Now, Mr. Flack testified also about where the ceiling and the wall met, that sometimes there was a gap there and sometimes it wasn't. Can you explain that in the typical way that's dealt with in construction?
Absolutely. If you look at the video and you look carefully, it has a stipple ceiling. What that means is that when you put up a wall, unless you're willing to sand that stipple ceiling where those two walls meet, that the standard practice in putting up a wall that butts up to a stipple ceiling, so you don't have to re-stipple, is you put the wall up, you tape it, you mud it, and then, as they had told me many times, we got to save money, we'll do some of this work. Anybody that knows anything about painting and mudding and sanding, you sand it, you swipe some mud on it, then you take a caulk bead and you run a caulk bead and you do that around the doors, the trim, and then you paint.
So who normally does the caulking?
The painter.
The painter. So that wouldn't be normally be done by the drywall person?
No, you wouldn't do that till you're ready to do the painting.
Okay. Now, there were a lot of pictures of electrical fixtures that didn't have face plates on them. Why would there not be face plates this
You
time?
don't put the face plates on until you finish the painting.
Okay. Okay. Now, on the video that you watched, there was some discussion about the breakers where for the HVAC. Could you go and explain that, please?
I helped them find an electrician to come out there to wire for the HVAC guy. During the time that the HVAC guy put in the system, put his breakers, Vicky hired that guy to do extra work. I believe the extra work was to put in this hot water tank, a larger hot water tank, because she was going to try to service two families. We warned her, by doing that, you could pull ampage from a 100 or 200 amp box, because the more ampage you pull, then so you understand about heat pump systems. Heat pump systems, it flows one way when it's cold, it flows the other way when it's hot. When it gets so cold, there's what they call an auxiliary heat pump. You put it into the heat pump. It requires a certain amount of ampage. The ampage that he put in there, the breakers, were sufficient. And he'd already finished. I never heard anything. Well, she called me one time saying, well, the air conditioner kicked off. I sent Mr. Perkins back out. He checked it. He said, it's working. I don't know what the problem is. But I recall that extra work that was done, and I started thinking to myself, you know what? I bet you 10 to 1 they pull ampage from the box, and when it gets cold, it doesn't have enough juice to run that auxiliary heat. It's not an electrical problem. I mean, it's an electrical problem in the sense that it doesn't, but it's not going to catch on fire or anything like that. I mean, that's why breakers are installed. If you overload the circuit, it kicks off. That's the protection. So all this nonsense about, well, I wouldn't let my child go in there, and it was this hazard. That's malarkey. That's just not even true.
Okay. Now, Mr. Brewster testified that the tub was leaking. Was that ever brought to your attention?
I got a call about the tub. And you have to understand that I'm dealing with people that are supposed to be their contractors, and I'm the supervision. The first day we were out there, they set up lawn chairs to watch the guys build the building. I said, oh my gosh, this is gonna be a real treat. Jonathan, or one of them, called me about, well, the pipes weren't quite straight underneath the building. Oh, Jonathan, I mean, you gotta understand, these guys aren't, like, brain surgeons or anything. I mean, something like that can be fixed. It's no big deal. You do that at the closing of the whole construction. It's called a punch-out list. If we see that there's problems, we'll go back and fix those problems. But he brought up a problem that the plumber had told all of us, that the way that was set, that they were having to go out, so the slope on that sewer was pretty minimal. And I do agree that that part of it probably need to be relooked at and changed, but it didn't require tearing out the whole thing to do that. I mean, that's a 15-minute job. You could have fixed that in 15 minutes.
Okay.
So I told Vic, I said, just call the plumber and tell him come back out and let's get this corrected. The plumber didn't show up in their time frame. Everything had to be yesterday, and I kept trying to explain to them. We had 3 weeks of rain. I said, Vicky, construction just doesn't work like this. You don't get stuff done. These guys are busy. Nashville was on the boom. You could barely get people to come work at all. So I said, you're just gonna have to be patient. We'll get them out there and we'll get it corrected. It's no big deal. And the issue of the faucet, when you put up tile, you don't put what they call the trim out.
Your Honor, I'm gonna object. This is not at all responsive to the question.
Sustained. Ask your question.
All right. I'm going to get to each thing, Mr. Shaft. I know you're anxious. On the issue of the claim that the shower with the water was coming out of the tub nozzle and the shower at the same time, their expert said that might mean a valve might have been upside down. How long of a fix is that for a plumber?
Well, if that was an issue, that would be 30 minutes to fix it. But the issue was that the nozzle wasn't on. There's a pull-up that redirects the water, and if that nozzle's not on, of course it's going to come out both of them.
So it's your testimony that once that after everything was done and we finished the trim out, that problem would have likely corrected itself.
And I remember too about that. I think that
Mr. Adams, listen to the questions asked of you and answer the question that is asked, and if you need to explain it, you can. You have a tendency to go off on some other topics, so listen carefully what both these lawyers have to say, please.
I will ask you again. So it's your testimony that when the trim out was finished, that problem likely would have corrected itself?
yes.
Okay. Their expert also brought up something, and I have to admit I had to look this up, I've never heard of it, called bullnose tile. What is bullnose tile?
When Vicky wanted a certain look to the bathroom, when we went and found her the tile that she liked, it didn't have what we call an edging of bullnose. So typically when guys install tile, if you don't have a bullnose, they just cut the tile square edge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's several solutions to that, because this is the first time I heard about that, is just yesterday, that there was a sharp edge. Well, of course there's gonna be a sharp edge when you cut tile. Every tile's gonna have that. It was a simple fix. You could either use a wood cove that fits over it, and you just glue it on there so there's no way that the sharp edge can get to you, or you could use a metal stripping to put in there that acts as a bullnose. But Vicky didn't buy a bullnose. Vicky tried to cut every corner she could.
Objection,
So-
once again,
yeah.
not responsive.
Sustained.
So, and Mr. Adams, I will get you to where you need to go. So, to finish this out, to put out those edges that you were talking about, does that require a tile to be taken off?
You could do it two ways. You could remove an edge, or you could take a simple saw and just cut it. But the simplest, the cheapest way to do it is to take a wood corner and just glue it, or use a small drill. You drill a hole in, and then you screw it, and you inset it, and you put a little putty on it, and you paint it. It's done.
Okay, okay. Underneath the house, there was some testimony by Jonathan Flack about a floor joist that had to be cut for some of the bathtub fixture to come out. What would it take to stabilize that, if that was an issue?
About 10 minutes. Every house I've ever built, you frame it, and then when you install the mechanics, you have to cut stuff. Standard construction procedure.
Okay, all right. And we didn't get to the video on the shaking wall, but they said they have a video of the wall that wasn't anchored. If there's a wall that's not anchored, what's the easiest way to remedy that?
Well, I went out there, I don't ever remember seeing a wall shaking, but if there was a shaking wall, sheetrock could have been cut back, a couple, nail gun could have anchored up, and it's done.
Okay. So now we've had testimony from Mr. and Mrs. Brewster that you did indeed meet with them to go over the receipts in question. What were some of their concerns?
They brought up a couple things in the receipts, that there was a $225 purchase for the gun that was needed to do the job.
What kind of gun was that talking about?
It was a nail gun.
Nail gun, okay.
And I agreed with him. I said, well, if you all don't want the gun, then I'll take that off. There was a comment about some water, a candy bar that we'd bought for the guys. It was hot, and we'd bought that. And I said, well, I'll take that off. There were some other questions that she had marked on some of the lovers. I said, Vicki, that's all the stuff that was used. There was shoring that was used, and I said, this was all material that was used on the job. None of these charges that I've shown you or given you receipts are used on another job, or used on your job. And when it was all said and done, I don't think there was a dispute. It was less than $1,000.
Okay, all right. So we had $41,000 and $21,000 on the email, and so there may have been a $1,000 dispute. So 41 plus 21 would be $62,000 minus $1,000. So we're talking about a $61,000.
I think when we went back and readjusted, I found some more receipts. It was between $62,000 and $63,000 that we had spent.
Okay, all right. Now, Vicki was mentioned about some materials that you said you couldn't bring out to the site. Can you explain what's going on with that?
I'm not quite sure what all that was about. When we got the building constructed, and we saw the variance of, how steep and what would have to be done, we removed some of the metal, and we told her we were going to have to put a footing under it so that we could backfill, because if you look at the building, it's sitting this way, so the slope goes this way. So in order to bring the level up properly, you'd have to put some kind of retaining wall to put gravel, backfill it, and then put your slab on top. So that was the reason. I'm not sure about what she's talking about. I mean, we had a concrete company come out and pour the footings. The guys laid the block. Once we started doing the backfilling, we would have to put some sort of retention wall across where the driveway would end, butting up to the end of the back side of the building. So there was going to have to be some extensive backfill done in preparation for that backfill.
All right. Now, had you heard before today any complaints about the pole barn not being square, or the side door, or a 2x4?
The pole barn is square, and I mean every building may be out by an inch. But believe me, I stood out there when that building was staked out by the company. The standard procedure is to go out there and square it up, because you can cock a building, so you measure from one corner to the other, and those measurements have to match. The building was square.
Okay, okay. Now, when we're talking about the walls of the building, from how long have you done construction?
Since 1985. And
Okay.
even before that, I constructed my own recording studio, so it goes back to the 70s. I have, plus my father was a mechanic, so
Right, right, right. Have you done pole barns before?
yes.
Okay. And is a wall considered complete before the garage door is put in, or does it have to have a garage door to be
Yes,
considered
it's
a wall?
complete.
Okay.
It has a header. Header is installed to support the roll-up doors they wanted to put in there.
Okay. Now, Mrs. Brewster was testifying earlier, going through the emails about that she thought that there was like $20,000 in reserve for the pole barn after the $61,000 was, $61,000 to $62,000 was spent on everything. Where would that reserve be in the budget?
I have no idea. I wasn't a privy to how much money they had or whatever. She spent a lot of money in the inside of the house, which I guess robbed the money that she had given me of finishing the barn. That's the bottom line. She just overspent on the interior of her house, and there was no money left to build the rest of to finish the completion of the barn. I told her point blank, I said, Vicki,
Your Honor,
You don't have enough
objection,
money.
Non-responsive.
Overrule the objection, you can continue.
so Vicki created her own problem. And she wanted to blame me for her problem. She went into that house trying to do all this work with their money. And then she spent their money, and there was no money left to build the barn. And then she wanted to say, oh, it's your fault. Not my fault at all. I warned you in numerous emails, email after email after email. It's gonna take more money. It's gonna take more money. When are you gonna give me the money? Because I can't, I've seen this pattern before. People get into remodel jobs. They're not prepared.
You're getting a little bit off field now.
Okay.
That's my question.
So, we already had testimony from Mr. Brewster that the $60,600 something estimate they were fine with for the completing of the pole barn. If that money had just gone for the pole barn, do you think you've been able to complete the project?
We've been real close. The only issue that I brought up to her attention was them insisting that building be built at the bottom of the hill. There was gonna be additional cost to backfill. As I said, when you cut dirt, it's cheaper. When you backfill, it's more expensive. So it would have been closer than what 41,000 did. So all this talk about, well, this wasn't done with it. There was no money to do that. You didn't give me the money to put up the doors. You didn't give me the money to pour the slab. You didn't give me the money to do the plumbing. You didn't give me the money to do the electric. You gave me a $60,000 payment, and you took almost $22,000 out of that money to finish the inside of your house.
Okay. That's all. No further questions.
Cross?
Your Honor, if I could see all the exhibits, please.
Okay. They are in no particular order, I
That's
apologize.
fine, Your Honor, I'm just gonna go through them.
Do you need the USB drive as well?
I do not.
Okay.
Mr. Adams, we're gonna start out with, let's see here. You said that at the time that this happened, that you had two businesses, correct? Buy Wholesale Incorporated and Home Improvement.
Wholesale home service.
Oh, Wholesale Home Services, yeah. All right, and your license was through Wholesale Home Services, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, and you testified, I believe, at the beginning of your testimony that that was a remodeler's license and that the limit on that was $25,000, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And that was the only license you had for doing this work, correct?
Well, I wasn't doing the work.
All right, but my question is, that was the only license you had at the time this work was
Right.
done, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you've testified several times that you were only there to supervise. You weren't doing the work, you were only there to supervise. You've seen all these emails and everything that have gone back and forth. Where does it say in there that, hey, remember, you're the ones that are the contractor, I'm just there to supervise? Have you seen that in any of those emails?
No, but I do show it right on the quote agreement. It says supervisor.
Okay. Are you talking about this agreement?
Yeah,
Okay.
right there.
Mm-hmm. And you also put the costs of everything, correct?
Right.
Okay. And you put the, you've got construction framing in there, you've got slab and footing finishing, you've got the electrical estimated and the plumbing estimated, but you
Right.
put exact costs for these other things in there, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and
Or
you
an
also
estimate.
put in the cost for finishing the driveway.
Mhm.
You put in the cost for grading, is that
Mhm.
correct?
Mhm.
Okay. Now, when this was done, had you gone out there and looked at the property?
What was done?
When this estimate quote was done, had you
Yeah,
gone out there and
I'd
looked at
gone
the
out
property? Okay. And you knew at that point where they wanted that pole barn placed on that property, did you not?
I only knew that they said they wanted it here, and I told her, I said, you're gonna have to get the surveyor to stake it exactly where you want it.
I
But she
understand.
showed me, she
But
said, I
you
want it
knew,
right
Mr.
here.
Adams, please just listen to my question and answer it.
Okay.
You knew where they wanted that building placed at the time you did this
In
estimate, did you not?
Within probably 5 feet, yes, I did.
And you testified also that you weren't there, you didn't see the thing get staked. You told her to go out there and have it staked, and you went out there
Right.
later, right? But then later on, you testified, when your attorney was asking you about the walls being square and everything, you said, and your exact quote was, I stood there and watched them when they staked it.
No, I didn't, well, if I said that, that was a misquote. What I mean is that it was already staked, and when we went out to lay out you have to set up forms. I watched the guys place the poles, or staking, what you call it. There's a staking of where it goes, and then there's a staking when you actually set the poles. I was there, I saw where the surveyor had staked it, I said, that's where the poles go. That's what I meant.
So what I can't understand is you have told your attorney that the reason for all this increase in price was because of where they wanted this building placed. But you did this estimate based on your knowledge of where they wanted this building
Yeah, but
placed,
the
right?
building wasn't constructed yet. Until the building goes up and you can see how you can adjust your grade, there's no way to determine that.
Well, let me ask you this.
A topo would have done it.
Let me ask you this, sir. In the one email, which we've looked at earlier, Ms. Brewster asked you if this was the top figure, this figure that was given in here, was that the top? And you said, yes, it is. Yes, that's the top figure.
I
I
didn't
may be
quite
able to
say
bring
it
it in
that
a little less, but that's the top figure.
I think if you want to pull that email up
Sure.
and read it again, I think I said yes, but there may be some conditions.
Let me find it. Okay, this is where you've attached the estimate,
Mhm.
and she says, is this the worst case? This was on April 6th of 2016.
Okay.
And your response was, on April 7th of 2016, yes, We can cut in some areas, but it depends on some of the details we still do not know. What line and sewer lines are the unknown. I can cut some of the costs here and there, but I think based on everything I've seen, 55 to 60,000 will be where you're at.
I want you to read real carefully. It says, but it depends on some of the details we still do not know.
But you don't say, when she asks you, is this the worst case, you don't say, well, it could possibly be higher because of this. You say, yes, this is the worst case.
Well, you can interpret it the way you want to interpret it. I'm going to interpret it the way I interpret it. I've clearly said that we have details we don't know about yet.
Okay. Now, Mr. Adams, this particular check here that is Exhibit 4, that check was made directly out to you, was it not?
It looks like it was.
Okay. And what was that check for?
That, because the two companies are separate, and because when you even supervise a job, you have to, make sure that the appropriate company gets the appropriate money. I told her, I don't know why they've been out with John Adams, because it was quite clear that I never made any kind of deal with them as John Adams. It was made as buy wholesale, providing the materials, helping them get laborers, and so on and so forth. So it was probably instructed to her that you need to at least write 2 checks to Wholesale Home Services, so that if it ever comes up to question, that even as a supervisor in the state of Tennessee, you still have to have a license. So that's the capacity that I was dealing in as the manager of Wholesale Home Services. One thing I can tell you is that that company is Wholesale Home Services was not incorporated. It was a proprietorship of my father. So under proprietorships, if you're a manager or you're John Adams, you can write a check to John Adams, or if you're acting as the manager, or Mary H. Adams,
Okay,
doing
Mr.
business
Adams,
as.
I don't need your opinion on the law.
Well,
on this.
whatever.
Why don't you re-ask your question? I didn't get an answer.
I'm sorry.
What was the $5,000 check for?
Right.
It was for the supervision capacity of what was stated in the estimate, in the original 50s or 60,000. It was a supervision provision in there, and I said you should probably write that check to Wholesale Home Services or John Adams or Mary H. Adams.
All right, well, let's look at that. It looks like in this invoice, the cost of the overhead and supervision was $10,000. So why would they have written you a check for $5,000 for the
Well, they
supervision?
made different payments over a period of time. And in fact, she called me up one day and said, "We're just going to go ahead and give you all the money." But if you flip the page, you keep saying this
No,
is
Mr.
an
Adams,
invoice.
I'm asking you the questions here.
Okay.
If you will just respond to my question.
That was probably partial payment on that fee.
But you don't know that for sure.
Well, I do, because it's made out that way.
Well,
It's made out to Wholesale Home Services.
this check is not made out to Wholesale Home Services, it's made out to John Adams.
Well,
And where on this check does it say for partial payment for supervision?
I don't have any control over how they write the check.
Okay, so it doesn't say that, does it?
Yeah, it does not say that. But I think if you look at if you put it
Okay,
back up.
Mr. Adams, that's my
Wait a minute,
question.
this is a point that needs to be made.
You know, Ms. Adams,
you
your
get
lawyer
this
can ask
redirect-
questions if he needs
Yes,
to,
yes,
but you just need to answer specific questions. Again, give your answer. If you need to explain an answer, you're certainly free to do that, okay?
I was gonna explain something.
Well, I think the question was pretty simple. Was there anything on the face of the check that indicated Wholesale Home Services?
Well, that's what I was about ready to say. If you look down at the deposit stamp, didn't it say Wholesale Home Services?
Well, you wanna put the check back up on that?
I don't think it went into my personal account.
I don't believe it says. It says withdrawal.
And
Well,
then
all I can say is we could go back to the records and see if that deposit was made into an account. I don't even think I had a personal checking account.
Mr. Adams, there's no dispute between us, is there, that $65,000 was paid on this job, correct?
I'm not sure about that. I haven't seen all the transfers. I saw one, I mentioned that to my attorney yesterday.
Mr. Adams, do you recall when I did a set of interrogatories to you, which has been a long time ago?
Yes, it has.
And I believe you answered them on May 1st of 2018. Is that your signature?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Adams, one of the questions I asked is about the payments that you had received, and you state, all work done for the plaintiffs was done with Anthony Brewster as a self-permitted contractor as shown on the Metro Nashville Building Permit, see Exhibit 2. I helped facilitate finding of and pass through payment of subcontractors working for Mr. Brewster. As of this date, the Brewsters paid a total of $65,000 toward the project, which included materials and subcontractors to do the work.
Yes.
So you would agree with me that $65,000 has been paid to do this work, right?
Yes, like you say, it was a long time ago. Yes, it says I said 65. I'll stick with that.
Okay. Now, this particular estimate that you did, Mr. Adams, here, I think you testified earlier, and I just want to make sure I'm clear on this, that you had not actually looked at the property when you did this estimate. Is that correct?
To my best recollection, that was over 6 years ago, I had not. She just sent me an email and said, hey, can you give me an estimate? And I estimated this purely on a floor plan that I pulled off, giving her these recommendations, that it should be, based on 12-foot spans, and it was a 48 by 40 building.
Okay.
Yes, I had not looked at the property yet.
All right. Is it customary in the contracting business to give an estimate on a piece of property or building on a piece of property that you have not looked at?
She asked me to provide a material cost. Buy wholesale, sells material. That's what I gave her.
Well, it looks like to me that you've got a floor plan drawn out here.
Right.
So that's not materials, right? That's a floor plan, correct? Yes or
It's
no,
a-
Mr. Adams? That's a floor plan, correct?
It's not a floor plan, it's a line drawing.
All right, what does that say right there?
Floor plan.
Okay, and this is what you sent to
Right.
the plaintiffs, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this part right here is materials, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then you have some stipulations on here about what it doesn't include, correct?
Exactly.
And you also have in here what it does include,
Right.
correct? And you say that it includes concrete slab, metal walls, roof, lumber, construction, doors, and windows.
Right.
Okay, but it's your testimony that you gave this without even having been out to the property or looked at it at all. Is that correct?
As far as I remember, I had never gone to see the property yet.
Okay. So
She
if
didn't even own it.
Ms. Brewster or Mr. Flack testifies that you in fact had seen the property before you did that estimate, you couldn't really dispute that. You just don't really remember. Is that correct?
No, I can't say that I can't dispute it, but just based on the emails themselves, I had not gone to see the property yet. She asked me to give her an estimate on what it would cost, material-wise, to build this building, and that's what I gave her. I had not seen the property at that time.
Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about the bathroom and the stuff in there. Well, first we'll talk about the HVAC system. You testified that the plaintiffs had a separate water heater added in that you think overloaded that that electrical system.
Could
Is
have,
that correct? Do you know that that electrical system is wired into a totally different breaker box than the HVAC system?
I don't have any knowledge of that.
Okay, so if the plaintiffs testified that, in fact, that's a completely different breaker box that that HVAC unit is wired into, you can't dispute that, can you?
I haven't gone to look at that. No.
All right. Do you know whether the plaintiffs used the same electrician to wire in this water heater as the used to wire in the
Yes.
HVAC system?
Yes.
You think they did or they
Yes,
did
I
not?
think they did.
So if they testify they used a completely different electrician, you don't think that's correct?
I don't think that's correct.
Now, you testified that all of these things that these videos or these photographs show, they were all really quick fixes. No, I don't think anything you testified about would have taken over half an hour to fix. So, if you knew all these problems existed, why didn't you just go fix them? I mean, it seems like to me you could have fixed all this in less than a day if it was such an easy fix on all of these things.
That wasn't my job. They were gonna do the painting and caulking, and why would I go out there? I mean, why would I go out there and do
Well,
that?
you were the guy taking the money, right?
I was the guy being paid for materials and supervision.
Okay. Now, have you gone out and looked at all of these problems? You give all these opinions about
Yesterday
how
was the
quick.
first day
Let
I
me
ever
finish
heard
my
about
question,
this.
if you would. You give all these opinions about how quick these fixes would have been. Have you gone out and looked at these problems?
No.
And these receipts that you were talking about, that you all went over, and you think there was less than $1,000 discrepancy. Isn't it true that one of these receipts was from before the project even started, that they brought up to you?
They bought materials from my warehouse. She gave us a check. No, it was not. It was in the time frame that we purchased or had purchased the material for her job.
Okay. And I think your attorney asked you about this supposed $20,000 reserve that supposedly my clients testified to. In fact, it was a $10,000 reserve, was it not?
I don't know anything about a $10,000 reserve.
Well, do you know anything about a $20,000 reserve?
No, I have no idea
That was
about
part
it.
of this, you testified about it earlier.
I testified that they wired money into my account. They gave me a couple
Objection,
of
Your
checks.
Honor. So I asked, based on my recollection of Vicki Brewster's testimony, that I remember her saying $20,000. I just brought that. That's where that number came from. She may have said $10,000. That's what I remember. But this is not like Mr. Adams volunteered and said it was a $20,000 thing. I remember Vicki Brewster saying there was a reserve. If they want to testify with a different number, but to try to hold Mr. Adams to my recollection is unfair.
All right, restate your question, Mr.
Okay.
Fulton.
Your attorney asked you about a $20,000 reserve, did he not?
Yes.
Okay. And you testified that there was no reserve, that you didn't have anything in reserve, that all that had been used before. Isn't that correct?
Yes, we
Okay.
spent the money that they gave us on the materials and the labor.
Okay. But the agreement wasn't for a $20,000 reserve, it was for a $10,000 reserve, was it not?
There's no agreement to any of that about some reserve for $10,000.
Okay,
I
so-
don't know where you're getting that.
It's your testimony that you didn't have any discussion with any of the plaintiffs about holding $10,000 in reserve?
No, she made a statement that she had 10,000 set aside. I didn't know anything about it.
Okay. I believe that's all I have for him, Your Honor.
Can you redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. On that email for the $60,600 estimate, where Vicky Brewster was asking if that was the worst case scenario, and for which Jonathan Flack said was where Mr. Brewster said that was an okay estimate. That was only for the pole barn, correct?
That's correct.
Correct. So the increase in price is not an increase in price on the pole barn, it's an increase in price on the entire project, correct?
Right, because there was simultaneously two construction projects going on.
Right. And it's already been put into evidence that what was spent on the pole barn was about $41,000,
Correct.
and what was spent on the inside was over $20,000.
Close to 23,000.
Right.
Yes.
So at that point, the entire project was over the initial estimate for the pole barn. Because
Well-
the initial estimate for the pole barn is $60,600.
The estimate of $60,800 something dollars, had they either given me the money for that or finished paying me for it, as I said in my email and later about the grading, they would have probably been about 96% finished.
Okay.
But they took the money they gave me, they said, well, I need to buy this, I need to buy this for the inside of the house. So she depleted the deposit or the money that she gave me, the $65,000. She said, oh no, just take it out of that, pay for this, pay for this. And that's exactly what we did. And we presented the receipts. Here's the receipts that we've spent on the pole barn. Here's the receipts that you paid or you spent on doing the interior work. It was almost $21,000 to $22,000 for the interior work and $41,000 for that. I used what they gave me, and I knew where this was going.
Okay.
It was like, oh, go do some more work, and after we get done, after I spend 10 or 15, 20,000 of my own money, oh well, you did say this, and I wasn't going there. I was supervising this job. Put the money in the account, and I'll finish the job. That's simple.
Right. Now, Mr. Adam, their attorney was just asking you about all of the pictures and the things that there'd be the simple fix and I guess like with the tile and everything like that. Was any of this brought to your attention before yesterday?
No,
Okay.
none.
All right.
Except that there had been a problem with the HVAC kicking off. I sent Mr. Perkins back out. He said, it's fixed, shouldn't have any more problems. We have testimony from Mr. Perkins.
Objection to what Mr. Perkins says.
Excuse me?
Objection to what Mr. Perkins says.
Well, I'm taking that as anticipatory. I'm not considering it hearsay.
Right, thank you, Your Honor.
So, I asked Mr. Perkins, did they ever, no. So all this stuff that now comes up about sharp edge tile, and they never called us about any of that. I waited for a month for them to put money into the account so I could go finish the job. Never did it.
Okay.
Came into September, no money.
Right.
So I assumed they were just out of money.
Right. And as from Mr. Brewster's testimony, he stated that after the meeting with you, the focus shifted back from the inside to the pole barn.
Right.
And all of the pictures that were shown yesterday, none of those were from the pole barn, were they?
No,
They were all on the inside.
inside,
So if the focus, from what they said they wanted, was on the pole barn, there would have been no reason for you to go.
Object to the leading.
Sustain.
Okay, draw the question. Okay, I want to put back up the exhibit that we already had up. This is the initial email from Vicky Brewster. Can you read the date on the top of this email?
March 21st, 2016.
Okay. And the date on this estimate?
We have to go down.
Can you see it?
Oh, okay, there you go. March 28th.
So basically, a week after you got the initial email from Vicki Brewster, you sent her basically a rough estimate.
Yeah,
Okay.
material.
All right. They keep bringing up some could be 10,000, 20,000. They seem very adamant about a $10,000 so-called reserve number. Do you see a $10,000 line item on here?
I see an overhead supervision
Okay.
line item.
And this was for what? This is for the what was this for? What part of the contract was for? Sorry, the construction.
Well, it's again, it's a quote. It's not a contract, it's a quote.
Right.
But we based our dealings off of this. It was for my supervision
Supervision of what?
of the pole barn being constructed.
Pole barn being constructed. So then, that's the only thing to your knowledge that could have been possibly talked about reserve was actually your final payment for your part of the work.
Object to the leading.
Okay.
Mr. Van, rephrase the question, please.
Okay. No further questions at this time.
Anything further, Ms. Faulkner?
Mr. Adams, I'm going to draw your attention back to this email that your attorney put into proof here. This is the one that's attached to the line item breakdown. And it says this is where you're given a breakdown on what the costs have been so far on the different projects, correct?
What we spent, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then later on this second page, there's a part here where it says the soffit charges. What is a soffit charge?
On the roof overhang, you have what they call a fascia board, and you have a soffit.
Okay, a
board.
soffit.
That's the
Okay.
underneath of the overhang of your rafters.
Okay. The soffit charges are correct. We had to get some blue links as well as Nashville Roofing. My original fee was based on 20% of the total cost. At this point, I have done twice the work I agreed to do, considering the additional cost it will take to complete the construct of your garage. It will well exceed an additional $20,000, not counting all the extra work I did at no cost for your interior remodel. Now this certainly implies here that you're doing this work. Does it not?
Well, when you use the word work, I mean, from a supervisor standpoint or anybody out there, I mean, it is work, so you just call it work. It doesn't mean that I'm doing the work.
So you're telling me it depends on what the definition of is then? Is that
No,
what
I'm
you're
not
telling me?
saying that. I'm just saying that it was quite clear that work was being done, and I was out there supervising. So when
This
I
doesn't say
reference
work was being done or I was out there supervising. It says my original fee was based on 20% of the total cost. At this point, I have done twice the work I agreed to do, considering the additional cost it will take to construct your garage. It will well exceed additional $20,000, not counting all the extra work I did
right.
at no cost for your interior
Well,
remodel.
in my opinion, when you do whatever job you do, if as a supervisor, that's work. I'm working as a supervisor.
Okay, so you're going to increase the cost of your supervision by 20% based on the total cost of the project?
Objection. That's not what it actually says, right?
Overrule the objection, you can ask that.
Is that what you mean here? You're going to increase it says your original fee was based on 20% of the total cost. So are you saying that you based your supervision fee on 20% of the total cost of this project?
Well, the original estimate said it was going to be around 10,000, but we had discussed between us that whatever the cost was, I would get 20%.
Okay, all right.
But in the original quote, we just put 10,000 because we weren't quite sure where we were going to go with all this. last time I added 20% of $60,000 or $65,000 is over $10,000. So I don't know what the issue is there, but.
All right, well, let me ask you this, on this line item that you've given me, your first entry here's $12,000, and it says contractor fee.
Mhm.
Is that going to you?
Yeah, well, it goes to the company per se, yeah.
But it doesn't say supervisor fee, does it? It says contractor fee, right?
Well, yeah, that's
Is this
right,
your
that's right.
handwriting?
That is my handwriting. I called it contractor.
That's all the questions I have for you, Your Honor.
Anything further on redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
So, it's saying here, the soffit charger, correct. We had to get some blue links as well from Nashville Roofing.
Can you
My
speak up, please?
Hmm?
Speak up,
Oh,
please.
sorry. The soffit charges are correct. We had some from Blue Links as well as Nashville Roofing. My original fee was based on 20% of the cost. At this point, I've done twice the work. I agreed to do, considering the additional cost it will take to complete the to construct your garage. It will exceed an additional $20K. When you talked about the additional $20K, were you talking about an additional $20K over the $60,000 or additional $20K over the $41,000 that already been paid?
Well, if you look at the date on this, it says September 11th, so we're already at a point where, you know, we've already got this dispute going on, they haven't put any money into it. And by then, I'm looking at the grading I spoke about and all the other things. So yes, but I was saying to her, you know, you haven't given me any more money. I've done all this work as a supervisor. I've done all this work in your house, or supervised, helped you find people, and all this work, and you're talking about that.
I'm sorry, you're not responding to my actual
Okay,
question.
yes, it's 20K over the 60.
20K over the 60 or 20K over the 41?
No,
Objection, Your Honor. He
20
answered.
over the
He
60.
Okay.
It's another
Mr.
20,000.
Faulkner, you have an objection?
Yes, he gave the answer, 20 over the 60, and he's asked him again the same question.
Okay,
No, overrule the objection. He can try and clarify the answer if he wants to.
okay. And so the reason why the cost was going up was, go ahead, explain.
Well, once again, we go back to the placement of the building. And once we got the building erected, then you could see more clearly, and I had the concrete guys come out and look at how it was constructed. They said, John, there's no way.
Objection to what someone else said, hearsay.
Sustained, don't tell us anyone else said,
Okay,
other than any of the plaintiffs.
okay. In your experience with construction projects, have you run into cost overruns before?
Yes.
Okay. And sometimes you've been the one that the cost overrun has hurt, sometimes you've been the contractor, sometimes you've been the other person on the other side when there's a cost overrun. You've had buildings built for yourself as well.
Yes.
Right. When you've had a building built for yourself, there's sometimes cost overruns.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, what would cause a cost overrun?
Labor changes. In this particular case, it had to do with the actual, the grade. It was much more intense than a visual eye could theoretically predict. This is why I told her from the very beginning, this is not standard. You do architectural drawings, you do topos, you do, and the only advice that she took from me was, well, I said, you've gotta have, I'm not gonna stake it out. You've got to get the surveyor to stake it out. And wherever you stake it out is where we'll build it.
Okay. When you're saying, we have the sentence here, not counting all the extra work I did at no cost for your interior remodel, when you say no cost, I mean, there was a $21,000 cost. What do you mean by the no cost there?
Well, there was no, I didn't charge her any fee. I just passed on what the actual material cost was and the labor cost of who was hired to do the mechanical work. I didn't add anything on to it.
Okay.
guess I do have a question, too. Mr. Adams, how were these subcontractors paid?
Initially, she was gonna pay them directly, but she asked me because they were going back.
Well, I'm not talking which agreement, how, if you know, how were they paid, cash, check, whatever?
Both.
From whom?
From me. From a wholesale home service or by wholesale.
And how often were you on the property supervising work?
At least 2 or 3 times a week. I'd ride out there and make sure that this was being done and that was being done.
So as I understand, your testimony is, you acknowledge you had an agreement with them to supervise this construction? Is that
Yes.
correct? And, were you doing this on behalf of yourself or on behalf of Buy Wholesale or Wholesale Home Services, I'm sorry?
In the capacity of my corporate or, yes, I was doing it under the company. I wasn't doing it on my own.
And so, I guess what the distinction you seem to be drawing is that you weren't hired to construct the building and be a contractor to do that. You were assisting home contractors get their job done, but you were supervising it.
Right. And this is, I mean, you have what you call, in any major construction, you have what you call a construction manager. That's essentially what I was, a construction manager. Because I told her from the very beginning, I would not permit this job, and I was not going to involve, myself or our company in pulling permits. That she would have to do that themselves. And I would help oversee and supervise the construction. I would help refine people. I would do all that.
All right. Council, have any questions based on my questions, Mr. Drake?
No questions, Ron.
Ms.
No
Fox?
questions, Your Honor.
Thanks, sir. Make that down. Next witness.
Your Honor, we ready to rest.
You
Rest.
defense rest, okay. Y'all wanna be heard? You need a moment before we get your thoughts
Your Honor,
together?
I would like to call Mr. Brewster back just as a rebuttal witness, just briefly,
All right,
actually just for one issue.
you may.
Thank you.
Mr. Brewster, I remind you, you're still under oath.
Would you state your name again for the record?
Anthony Wayne Brewster Jr.
All right. Mr. Brewster, you heard Mr. Adams testify here a minute ago about this HVAC system. Is the HVAC system, Mr. Adams blamed it on the fact that this water heater that you all had installed was tripping this breaker. Is that possible?
Well, the water heaters are actually on a separate breaker system that's inside the garage. Back in the 80s when the addition was put on, the electrical service was upgraded to a 440 electric circuit. I'm not an electrician, but the reason I know that is because when we had gotten electrical quotes, the electrician was talking about the fact of how he hadn't seen a system like that in a long time, where the internal part of the house, the main part of the house, was one breaker panel, then from a leg on the big wire it comes up to a shut-off separate that goes into the other breaker panel, and then there's a separate shut-off for the main house HVAC. So the 220 panel for the main house is separate from the 110 panel in the bump out, and then there's a separate 100 amp shut-off for the HVAC system for the main part of the house. And I thought that was funny because we didn't have a single one shut off that connected all three separate services, that each one was separate.
Okay, so it's my understanding of your testimony, the water heaters are on a separate, completely separate breaker box than the HVAC system, is that correct?
Then the HVAC system that is in the bump out, yes.
Okay, the one that was installed,
Yes.
okay. And did the same electrician do the wiring on both of those systems?
No.
Okay, but do you recall the name of who did the wiring on each of the systems?
I remember that it was Lamont that did the wiring on the HVA system in the bump out and on the water heater, because he came out in an old Comcast van. That's why I remembered him. The other gentleman was a younger gentleman who admitted to us that he was still learning electrical, and I remember that Mr. Adams actually had to give him a ride. He was a younger gentleman that did the other electric work inside the house.
Okay, and did Mr. Adams arrange for these two different electricians to do this work?
Yes.
That's all I have for him, Your Honor.
Cross?
Mr. Brewster, since we're still coming back to the HVAC system, I want to make sure I understand what your understanding is of what's wrong with it.
My understanding is that the wire that the electrician ran from the box is not the correct grade wire that's needed to run the system, and the breakers that were used in the box are not the correct breakers. So it's not able to withstand the supply, and it's causing the HVAC system to kick off. So because of that, we didn't want to use it anymore, so that's why it sat and nothing's been done to it, and why we haven't called an electrician, because we just haven't used it. But it would need to be rewired, and then whenever it is rewired, check to see did it do any damage when it was kicking it off.
Okay, let me understand again, because I asked one question, I got a couple of answers, but I want to just parse everything out.
Yes.
Because the first question was what you understood to be wrong with it, and so basically it's a wiring, is what you understand, the wiring, the breakers, okay. And then you went into why you haven't called an electrician out
Correct.
to look at the wiring is because you haven't been using it.
Correct.
So you haven't been using it because the wiring is incorrect, and you haven't called somebody else out to look at it because you haven't been using it.
Correct.
It's a little circular reasoning, wouldn't you think?
No, because whenever we first tried to use the AC system and it kicked off, and we figured out why it was kicking off, that the wiring wasn't correct, we were still in the process of this suit, and we were at first trying to preserve everything as evidence and not change anything. So we didn't do anything with the bump out until recently, whenever John and his wife had a son, and they needed to be able to provide him with a place for a room. So they had started clearing out the hazards, and they haven't gotten to doing that yet. But that's why we did the videos, so that we could have that evidence of what was there before it got taken out.
So rather than call an electrician and get him to give you an estimate and some expert testimony, you decided to not mitigate and to preserve evidence. Is that
Correct.
correct? So you did not mitigate.
No.
No further questions.
I don't have anything further for him, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Brewster. You can step down, sir.
Thanks.
Any other rebuttal?
No, Your Honor, that's it.
Again, would y'all like to be heard now, or do you need a moment to gather your thoughts?
I'm ready.
Okay. Be heard.
Your Honor, this case is a pretty standard case of breach of this construction situation. You had Mr. Adams who now wants to get up there and claim that, oh, I was just a manager, I wasn't doing anything here but managing this site. But there's nothing in any of the paperwork or any of the conversations that surround any of this other than what Mr. Adams says he said. There's nothing that would indicate that Mr. Adams was acting as anything other than a contractor on this site. His own paperwork here shows that he lists his fee as a contractor fee. He says, well, I was just, I was just going to I was just going to oversee. Well, but the first thing he sent them on this first estimate was a floor plan of a building. The managers on a construction site, they don't do floor plans. They are there to make sure that the workers are doing what they're supposed to be doing and that the work is progressing like it should be progressing. But whoever these subs are would be doing the actual designing of the buildings and the working and that sort of thing. Now, regardless, this project was undertaken. It was, if you could even say, halfway finished. Mr. Adams blames it on the fact that, well, it's because of where that building was placed. It's because the building was so far in the backyard, where the building was placed. Well, the fact of the matter is, Your Honor, before Mr. Adamson, he admitted himself, before he did that second estimate, which is the one they were all operating under, the one that was a little over $60,000, he went out and looked at the building. He knew where the building was going to be placed. The thing had been staked out. He knew exactly where that building was going to be. So how does that position of that building affect his original estimate after he's estimated it based on the position of that building? So at this point, Your Honor, Mr. Adams is basically, I believe, in over his head. He realizes that he's not going to be able to finish this job for what he initially quoted it at, and he starts blaming everybody around him. And then he just up and quits the job. Well, he leaves my clients with half-finished work. He's got this pole barn that's halfway constructed. It's certainly not anywhere near finished. Halfway constructed. He's got this remodeling to the interior of this bathroom, the things that were done in there, that's halfway or even less finished. And he just, and then he blames my clients for not wanting to pay him more money, even though this is what was agreed upon. Now, I think Ms. Brewster testified that we weren't out of money. We had more money to be able to pay, but we wanted some accountability. We wanted to know where all of this money was going. We wanted to know what it was being spent for. We wanted to know why these subcontractors weren't there on the site working. And when all of these things started being called into question, then that's when Mr. Adams decides to get off of the project. So my clients now are left with partial work that's basically going to have to be redone. They went through and tore out the work that had been done in the bathroom.
Well, and forgive me for interrupting you, but again, non-jury,
That's fine.
I interject myself more frequently. What about the first threshold question? What is the basis of claiming that John Adams individually is liable?
I understand that, Your Honor, and we, of course, have always known this is going to be an issue here. But Mr. Adams was dealing directly with these people. Now, he wants to, the court knows just as well as I do how difficult it is when you've got a person that is representing a corporation to distinguish between whether they're acting in their own interest or whether they're acting in that corporate interest. The fact is, I would submit to the court that there are several things that we have put into proof that are tells on that Mr. Adams was acting for his own benefit. Number one, everything's spread between several different entities. Mr. Adams, the buy wholesale, and this other entity. That everything's spread between those three. Mr. Adams, my clients came into contact with Mr. Adams
I think by Mr. Adams' testimony, Wholesale Home Services was not a corporation, but was a proprietorship.
I believe that's what he said.
I know, but I think that's the only proof I've got so far.
Yeah, I believe
Mr.
that's
Adams
what he
may have
said.
on that.
But that was the entity that the permit was, or the construction license was in.
I understand.
Yeah.
the, again, I mean, if it, are you trying to pierce the corporate veil? Or are you trying to say that he was doing this independently? What?
I'm trying to say he was doing it independently.
Okay.
That is my position on this. And I think you can see that, number one, there's a check made out directly to him. It's not made out to buy wholesale.
That was the last payment that was made to him. The $60,000 in payments were all made out to a corporation.
Where they were wired into a corporation account,
Right,
yes.
made
that's
to a
correct.
corporation.
That's correct. But that $5,000 payment was made out directly to Mr. Adams. And for all intents and purposes, Your Honor, Mr. Adams is Buy Wholesale Incorporated. Now, I understand, obviously, that, you know, it is a corporation, but it's not like there's a bunch of other employees or a bunch of people that were there on the site from Buy Wholesale other than Mr. Adams. For all intents and purposes, he is Buy Wholesale. So, he's dealing with the clients, and I think Your Honor saw, I tried to point out, in these emails, you know, they were emailing back and forth about this project, and then he would say, oh, and I need you to do this work and this work and this work in the bookkeeping part of it. You know, he was treating her as an employee also. So, you know, it was definitely a lot of intermingling of stuff that was going on. And you know, all we've got to be able to show, I mean, it's not like I'm going to have some smoking gun that says, here's Mr. Adams says, oh no, Buy Wholesale's not involved in this, it's only me. It's not like I've got some smoking gun. But what I have is I have a check that's made out to Mr. Adams. I have the fact that in these emails, they're communicating directly with Mr. Adams. Yeah, I know that a lot of the branding on these emails, a lot of the little logos on there were Buy Wholesale. But Mr. Adams is the one answering all the questions. There's nobody else from Buy Wholesale that's answering any of those questions. So it's my position, Your Honor, that that Mr. Adams was basically just funneling things through Buy Wholesale, but that it was all for his benefit. That this money was for his benefit. And so at that point, we want to. Earlier he also testified, I believe, that he did not even have a personal account. So, you know, there's just no distinction made. There's no attempt to draw a distinction between Mr. Adams personally and Buy Wholesale and this other entity. So at this point, Your Honor, what we're asking the court to do is we're asking the court to render a judgment against Mr. Adams. We're asking the court to render this judgment and bring it under, give us compensatory damages in the amount of $100,000 is what we're asking for in compensatories. I think we've proven 65,000 conclusively. And we're asking the court for whatever award is made to be made pursuant to the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act. As Your Honor said at the beginning of this, we've got to elect, you know, one or the other, either punitive damages or the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act. And we're asking that it be awarded under the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act. And I have cited, Your Honor, in my trial brief, the sections of the Consumer Protection Act that I'm asking that it be brought under. And if Your Honor would like, I can go over those again, but I'm sure Your Honor has been over these already.
Well, again, if you want to highlight for me, what are the deceptive acts that you believe he committed?
The deceptive acts are the fact that none of these supposed increases in these costs were ever contemplated by any of these parties until this work already started. I mean, we had an email that Mr. Adams answered directly where she said, is this the top figure? Is this the, I can't remember the exact wording of the email, but is this the topmost figure? And he says, yes. He says, I could bring it in under, maybe under, if we cut some costs, I could get it to maybe 57,000, or I could get it if we cut some costs. But yes. And then all of a sudden, it's increasing $20,000, $30,000. Well, that's just deceptive. The fact of the matter is, Your Honor, when you get a person in there and you start this build and you're doing this work for them, and you're halfway through it, and then all of a sudden you say, oh, by the way, I'm going to need more money, and it's way beyond what was contemplated, and then you've got, you know, if I don't get the money, I'm going to walk away from the job. You know, Your Honor, I would submit to you that this is deceptive. I would submit to Your Honor that it's deceptive for a person to represent that they're going to be in there doing the work, and then saying, "Oh no, I was never the contractor. I was just I was the manager on the thing. I was the supervisor." You know, that's deceptive, Your Honor. My clients certainly, as they said through their testimony, certainly thought that Mr. Adams was the contractor. They never had any inkling that he was anything other than the contractor. The fact is, Your Honor, Mr. Adams says, "Oh, I told Ms. Brewster, I told her I am not, you know, this is all you, and I am not." But none of those emails or none of the documents that have all been put into proof here show any of that. They don't show him saying, "Remember, I'm only the supervisor. Remember, you're doing this, and I'm just, you know." There is nothing in these documents that say anything like that. So now he comes in, you know, in hindsight, sits on the stand and says, "Oh no, I was just the supervisor on the property." That's deceptive, Your Honor. That is deceptive. He's trying to basically dodge the bullet here. He's hiding behind several different things. Number one, it wasn't me, it was by wholesale. Number two, I'm not the contractor, I'm the supervisor. That's deceptive. My clients had no idea that any of this was going on. They had no idea that Mr. Adams was acting as anything other than a contractor. As Ms. Brewster testified, they contacted 3 contractors and got 3 estimates. You know, they certainly didn't get an estimate from 2 other people to be the supervisors. They got 3 contractors' estimates. So for him to fool them, or to attempt to fool them, to say, "Hey, I don't really have any responsibility in this, I don't have any liability," that's deceptive. You know, he took their money under false pretenses. So, Your Honor, this is where we're traveling under the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act. Now, Your Honor, certainly, as attorneys, we all sit back and think what we would love to have to be able to make these suits easier. I would love to have a contract between these parties. You know, an actual written contract with terms and everything, spelling out what everybody's duty is, and, you know, having a contract. I would love to have that. But I don't have the benefit of that. I don't have a contract. So what we have to do, Your Honor, what the law says we have to do, is we have to look at the documents that surround the transaction. You know, that's all we can do. And so I have done my best to try to demonstrate to the court the documents that surround this transaction, and show that at the time, Mr. Adams was acting as the contractor. Mr. Adams tells us he knows more about building than anybody in this room. And you know, he was acting as the contractor. So we've got to take him at his word. That's what my clients understood. That's what the documents that surround this show. Mr. Adams was doing this on his own. He was working with Buy Wholesale, basically using it as a shield, but he got a check made out to himself. All the communication was directly with him, and so what we're asking for the court to do is to render a judgment for compensatory damages in this, and to make that pursuant to the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act under the provisions that I've cited, and treble the damages and award attorney's fees.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Drake?
Your Honor, I'll be honest, I'm not sure which courtroom I'm in, because I've read this complaint, and the theory of the case has changed the last minute several times. The complaint talked about, the amended complaint management, they had a chance to go back and fix it, talked about the Consumer Protection Act, and said nothing about cost overruns. It talked about that Mr. Adams represented himself as a licensed contractor without being a licensed contractor. And, I have to thank my opposing counsel for bringing in the license, because I came on this case the last minute. I wasn't able to find it. But he put into evidence about the license with Wholesale Home Services. And there was some question about the website. We have the testimony now of Jonathan Flack, where he cannot find a website where Buy Wholesale Inc. said that it had a contractor's license. I cannot get into the heads of the plaintiffs. We'd have unrebutted testimony that Vicki Brewster went in. She said she went in with Mr. Adams and pulled the permit as a self-permit and had her husband sign off on that. I don't know if there's some deceptive practices between the husband and wife. Mr. Brewster says he didn't know about this, that it was a self-permit, until way late in the game. But Vicki Brewster knew, or had reason to know. She said she's testified that she's good with facts and figures and dates, and she's done bookkeeping for years, so we're not talking about somebody that's not sophisticated. Somehow she pulls a permit and she doesn't notice that it says self-permit. That boggles the mind. So there is really no claim for the Consumer Protection Act, and now at the 11th hour, he's trying to shoe in a Consumer Protection Act based on what's not in his complaint. The complaint matters. The plaintiff is the master of his or her complaint, and they have to say at the outset, and if they need to amend, if they need to amend another time, they can do a motion to amend to say this is what we need to put in to this. So there is no legitimate Consumer Protection Act claim based on their complaint. But going with that, he's claiming that a cost overrun is a deceptive practice, so that if you got to have a bid and the price goes up, Your Honor, I would ask this court to take judicial notice of cost overruns in federal government contracts, where a jet plane is supposed to cost $10 billion, it turns over and cost overruns, it's $25 billion. Cost overruns happen all the time, and the plaintiffs have not brought forth any case law to suggest that a cost overrun, that somebody finding out that and saying that we believe it's going to be this way, but for whatever reason, and we had testimony about from Vicki Brewster about rain and about vehicles getting stuck and other things that can affect the cost and the time of the project. Your Honor, my profession before becoming an attorney was as a computer programmer and engineer, and there's a saying in engineering: fast, cheap, good. Choose two. In other words, if you're putting pressure on the project to be done faster, it's going to affect the cost. If you put pressure on the cost, it affects the quality or affects all these things. They were trying to have everything at once, everything all at once. They wanted a pole barn done under $61,000, and then they wanted all this interior work. We have unrebutted testimony that the interior work was over $20,000. And so when you take $41,000 and you add $22,000, you're well into the $65,000 that of the opposing counsel says that they have quote unquote proven it as their damages. They have not proven any damages. Their own expert, when Mr. LeSueur, when he was here yesterday and testifying, and when he started getting into the HVAC, and he was testifying before I was cross-examining him on direct, he testified about the HVAC unit. And then when I was cross-examining him, asking about the HVAC unit, their own counsel objected to him being an expert for what he'd already testified on, and say he's not an expert. Well, he's the one that they brought in to testify about the HVAC. And he was testifying that, oh, maybe it could have been a condenser, maybe the whole thing was going on. Now we have testimony from Mr. Brewster that it wasn't anything wrong with the HVAC at all. It's just the wiring. So they're conflicting with their own expert. They had an expert, and the expert went out again recently, but the testimony that he gave, that wasn't the first time he went out. They've had all this time from when they hired the expert and when they disclosed the expert, for the expert to go out to the property during the daylight and look at the entire thing, the pole barn, and the inside, and yet now they're saying, oh, he didn't go out and look at it because it was dark. He had plenty of opportunity to go out and give expert testimony on whether the pole barn was square, whether there was rotting wood up in the roof, whether there was a problem on the side of the door. He had everything. He could have testified about the grading and what was the best way to do it. He didn't bring forward any testimony. And on the interior, what their experts' words was, well, either it's incomplete or it's not done correctly. Well, okay, we can stipulate to the fact that it wasn't completed. That nobody is disagreeing with the fact that it wasn't completed. My client's testimony is it wasn't completed because they had burned through the majority of the $65,000. And so they ran out of money. And they could talk about, oh, we've got money in reserve. Now, opposing counsel just said that after the meeting, Mr. Adams refused to deal with him. That's not what his own client said. He's contradicting his own clients. His own client said that after the meeting, the focus shifted from the interior to the pole barn, and there was more discussion. And as there was more discussion, they were focusing on the pole barn. Mr. Adams is like, we spent most of the money you already gave me, so that's why we can't go forward on the pole barn. He did not say at the meeting where, and we don't even have apparently there's some spreadsheet that was given to their attorney that was never put into evidence to say what they said was their objections onto the spending. So we don't even know what that number is. Mr. Adams testified it was under $1,000. We don't have and not even what he agreed to. We don't know what they objected to. We don't have a bottom line figure for any of that. We have things that they were unhappy about, but the idea that, and we've got the pictures. They're using that pole barn right now. It might not be perfect. It needs a floor. It needs walls. It has walls. Excuse me. It needs doors. Needs windows, and so forth. They ran out of money, but they're still using it. It does not need to be torn down. The reason why this case is so squirrely, the reason why they had to come in with a completely different theory of the case, is their original argument was the building had to be completely torn down. Not that there were some more things that had to be done, or things that had to be fixed, or things that had to be going forward, but that the entire building had to be torn down. They're not able to argue that now. Apparently, according to Mr. Brewster's testimony, their attorney did not fully advise them that that part of the case had changed. He didn't know that until yesterday. that is his own attorney's fault. He should have let his clients know. Maybe they could have come to a settlement earlier if he had let his clients know, we're not going to be able to argue that the building needs to be torn down. But now, and they have also admitted, Mr. Brewster admitted that they've done no mitigation. There is a duty to mitigate under the law, and their experts talked about the damages being speculative. We don't award speculative damages in Tennessee. So, no, they have not proven any compensatory damages, and certainly they have not proven Consumer Protection Act.
All right, thank you. Mr. Faulkner, anything further?
Your Honor, I think you've got the idea. Thank you.
All right. Well, again, sorry you folks find yourselves in this situation. Been going on for a long time. And the court finds that there is no written contract, but without a written agreement, plaintiffs did make payments of $60,000 to Buy Wholesale Inc. And there's a separate check for Mr. Flack and Mr. and Mrs. Flack's account for $5,000 payable to John Adams. The plaintiffs are seeking recovery under theories of breach of contract, violation of Tennessee Consumer Protection Act. You haven't really addressed it. In the complaint, there was some reference to breach of warranty, but there's no showing of warranty, that any specific warranty issued here, and fraud or misrepresentation and fraud. First, allegations of fraud in Tennessee have to be pled with specificity. Fraud has to be shown where you allege what the fraudulent misrepresentation was, and what damages flowed from that. In this case, the amended complaint makes a broad reference to the concept of fraud, but it doesn't identify with specificity acts that could constitute a fraudulent act. The essential problem I see with this, and again, we're missing an agreement. Why is it every non-jury week I have people come in here and nobody takes the time to write something down on a sheet of paper or a cocktail napkin or whatever and say, this is our deal? I have to go back, like I said, I've got a time machine. I've got to go back and try and figure out what was the arrangement. Was there a meeting of the minds for a legal purpose? Obviously, it's a legal purpose. Was there consideration? $65,000 is certainly consideration. It's a vast sum of money. But what was the meeting of the minds? What was the intent of the parties to accomplish this? I can consider, this is not goods. Some goods were sold, but this is mainly over services, and is the allegation of it. And I can consider documents and be partially oral and partially written. And I've got two documents, Exhibits 1 and Exhibit 8, that essentially are estimates identifying a scope of the discussions. Clearly, they're both estimated. One says estimated, one's estimate. Quote, these are not contracts, but they can be viewed to determine what the parties intended to do. And importantly, on both of these, plainly and clearly, it's indicated to be quotes from Buy Wholesale Inc. John Adams' name does not appear on any of these documents. A corporation can only act through its employees and agents and officers and directors. And corporations can be wholly owned by one person, and obviously can be source of confusion sometimes. But Tennessee recognizes corporations as a separate, distinct legal entity. And while a corporation can be held vicariously liable for the acts of its agents, officers, directors, the reverse doesn't flow. Agents, officers, and directors can't be held vicariously liable for the acts of the corporation. Before I even get into the issues of proof and what the damages are, essentially it appears plaintiffs are seeking a rescission of the contract or return of their funds, and then punitive damages or consumer protection. You've elected to determine that's a deceptive act, and if the court finds that it was willful and knowing, can award up to treble damages for that on it. But these are all actions of Buy Wholesale Inc. Now, Mr. Adams was the face of Buy Wholesale Inc. I understand that. It's complicated further by the fact that, respectfully, Ms. Brewster, you're a bookkeeper. You were providing bookkeeping services, not a bookkeeper. You were providing some bookkeeping services to Buy Wholesale Inc. and Wholesale Home Services, and therefore you were aware of the corporate nature of those entities. This wasn't a situation where the corporation was concealed from anybody. It's evident. These emails even have this logo that's on there. Mr. Flack was very candid. He remembers the logo standing out on the website that he went to on it. And there may very well be actions against Buy Wholesale Inc., but Buy Wholesale Inc. has been voluntarily dismissed from this action. The only party before me right now is John Adams, individually. And respectfully, the court finds that the plaintiffs have not proven by preponderance of the evidence that defendant John Adams is individually liable. The proof instead shows that any agreement was between the plaintiffs and the corporate entity Buy Wholesale Inc. Again, respectfully, I'll go a step further on it. I've got to find, was there a meeting of the minds? The burden is on the plaintiffs to show more likely than not that this was the agreement. At best, what has been shown is that there was some type of supervisory effort being provided by Mr. Adams overseeing this construction. He disputes that he was to build it and he was a traditional contractor. Frankly, there's scant proof in the record as to the pole barn being of such poor quality that it justifies some sort of award of damages. As Mr. Lejeune said, at best it was incomplete. Now there might be an argument that it wasn't finished out, but we have all these emails and conversations. Mr. Adams kept saying, "Send me more money, send me more money." One of the issues is, what was your agreement? Was your agreement to keep sending more money as he needed it, or was it, we're cutting this off at $65,000? You're going to do everything for $65,000, and that's it. I just don't know, and I don't have that before me. And respectfully, y'all have the burden of convincing me by preponderance of the evidence what that agreement was on that, and I don't see that that's been shown. The bathroom situation, obviously, the pictures that were shown and the tub with the water coming out of the lower spigot all seem to be issues that need to be addressed. But again, what was the agreement? It wasn't even going to, it was supposed to be paint ready. Whatever that means, I guess sanded down, and that you could say that some of the walls were not finished properly on that. But again, you haven't shown by preponderance of the evidence that there were damages associated with that it wasn't delivered as contemplated under the agreement, because I don't know what the agreement was. And I empathize with you. I'm sorry. I've got to follow the law on these things. It's a lot of money they paid your company. And I think I recognize the dissatisfaction, and I respect that it's earnest dissatisfaction you all are expressing on this. Unfortunately, for your position, you have to prove that this man individually was doing that under these circumstances. So respectfully, the case is dismissed. Cost of tax to the plaintiffs, for which execution shall issue if necessary. Mr. Drake, if you will prepare the order, please,
Yes, sir.
on this. And again, I do this dozens of times every year. I'm saying, please, when you're in any kind of business arrangement, both sides, write it down, whatever it is. Just say what you're going to be doing. Write it and sign it, and then nobody has a faulty memory of what the deal was supposed to be, or gets confused. And if there was a dispute, it can come back to me or any other judge, and we can look at it and see what's going on there. So I wish you all the best, and Mr. Adams as well. You do all of you. And Mr. Drake, and if you prepare the order
Yes,
on
Your Honor.
this. Any questions, Mr. Faulkner?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Mr. Drake, any other questions?
No, I just want to get a copy of the.
Sure. Give me my card in that. All right. Take care. Everybody stay safe out there.